I just echo Jerome's thanks of Action Deafness and your support for this and the upcoming happy hours. It's a really great asset for us, and it makes our reach to the deaf community in particular one where we can share a lot of insights and information that's happening around housing and care for an ageing population generally. And obviously in this particular session, we're focusing on happy design in relation to dementia. And as Jerome highlighted, this follows a recent APPG report that I co-authored with, and I must give full credit to Katie Twyford, as she did the lion's share of the work and was a great partner to work with. And we bounced off each other in a number of ways to make sure we got this report right, let alone, for those of you who know, reporting to a very illustrious committee in the all-party parliamentary group on housing and care for older people, which is chaired by Lord Best, and this inquiry also includes a number of very important parliamentarians, and I'm sure Katie will talk a little bit about methodology shortly. What you've got here is our agenda for this afternoon, but I just want to add that this session is being recorded and the slides will be circulated post this event, and we normally issue those either later on the day or tomorrow, Friday in this case. And if you're not a member of the LIN, we publish a weekly bulletin that comes out on a Friday, and you can access information about all our happy hours therein. Just a few words, just to say that this is the first of two sessions. This particular session focuses on the design principles, and probably is going to focus a little bit more on mainstream housing and specialist housing, which is on the new build variety, so new homes that are being built. And this is because there's so many recommendations and key issues the APPG Inquiry captured. We decided to focus two slots, one on new build and the other much more on retrofitting existing homes and the use of technology. So we have a second session to coincide with Dementia Awareness Week in May, and we'll give you more details about that session later in the chat box. But as I said, it gives me very great pleasure to welcome Katie. Katie was the co-author of this report and worked with me and a few other people behind the scenes, including Lois Beach, the Housing LIN's stakeholder engagement senior officer and researcher, and teams with the Secretariat for the APPG. So Katie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. If I start to share my screen, I'm hoping that everybody can see that now. Is that okay? Can you see that? Great.
Yeah, that's great.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for inviting me to this. I won't go through who else contributed to the APPG at the moment, because Jeremy's just alluded to that. What I'm hoping to do in my 10 minutes is to talk around the process of the APPG briefly, what some of the key issues were, and then what some of the recommendations were, and hopefully pick up what the recommendations were for the different members of the audience that we've got in with us today. I was just trying to see if I could see Monica in case she tells me I'm speaking too quickly, but I can't actually see her on my screen now. So if I'm speaking too quickly for the sign language, somebody else will have to let me know. So
she's given you the thumbs up, Katie.
Lovely, thank you. So first of all, about the APPG inquiry. It started last June. It lasted for 8 months. It reported back in February the 17th. It involved 4 sessions, 4 live sessions, which were done on Zoom because it was all done during the COVID period. And those 4 sessions involved people who were living with dementia and their carers, which was great because it put them at the heart and we heard their really live experiences. It also included the parliamentarians and experts from the field. So that included housing providers, chief executives, educational representatives and others from the field, and architects and people who are here today. With those 4 sessions, we had some verbal evidence, but we also supplemented that with written evidence. And I'm sure a lot of you who are here today also submitted some evidence. So thank you for that, because it made it a really rich report and really great to analyse it. the findings came out into 5 main areas. We themed them into 5 main areas, which are the 5 chapters in the report, but it resulted in 20 key issues, and they then were translated into over 40 recommendations. And given that there were 40 recommendations, we decided we would target them at different people so that not everybody had to think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So that's what I'm going to take us through now in the next part of the report in this session. The 5 different chapters, or the 5 areas that came up, were, first of all, what older people told us about their own experiences and living with dementia. And any of you that have heard Wendy Mitchell speak so eloquently about her experiences will know how powerful that could be. The second area that came through was around understanding dementia. So how do we understand it and how do we plan for it? So again, any of you that are from local authority backgrounds and your local plans and the demographics, that was all in that sort of area. And what sort of options for housing are on the cards locally for different people. The third chapter was really focusing on the importance of having a range of housing choices within different communities, and those choices were between living in a substantial home that you've lived in for however many years, right the way through up to very sheltered and supported extra care housing with care, but didn't tip over into residential, so it didn't cover residential care. But what it did do in that chapter also was looked at the range of housing options with and without dementia design. So there'll be a lot of the design elements in chapter 3. Chapter 4 then looked at technology and using adaptations to support people with dementia. And chapter 5 looked at care planning, the support, and how whatever you're deciding, it has to also be a decision about housing. So really putting housing in the middle of that. If I move on from that, the 20 different key issues were clustered into different areas, and I haven't got time to go through all of them, but you can see that there was one that was specifically around design for homes and communities. And within that, there were 2 specific issues that were flagged up with us as part of the inquiry. And the first one, which was key issue 10, was that although the well-designed housing that's good for everyone is championed in the HAPPI report, there's actually no single common set of dementia design principles adopted at the moment. And so people are using different ones. And then the second part of that was that recognising that some of the greatest impacts really are from some of the things that are easiest to implement and aren't necessarily expensive. And we'll hear about that later on this afternoon or in the next session. And then the second part of the key issue 11, was really looking at although there's lots of guidance around good design and lots of knowledge around good design, sometimes actually getting it off the ground is compromised because not everybody's got that understanding. So there's a lack of understanding amongst some people, and particularly they talked about town planners, building control officers, and some of the issues that you have there, and developers. And it was around trying to unpick that a little bit. So all of those can impede dementia-ready housing. But those issues, once highlighted, were then translated into the recommendations. And you can see the recommendations were targeted at different groups. So the poll that you did at the beginning of this session was really helpful for me because it gave me a feel for where you're coming from. And you can see that within the recommendations, by far the largest group of recommendations is this one here, which is the number 13, the big one, which is for local authorities. So interesting that we've got a large portion of local authority people attending today. So the 13 recommendations from them, followed closely and hot on the heel by 7 recommendations each for housing providers and for departments of health, social care and NHS. Again, I'm not going to go through all those recommendations this afternoon. What I am going to do is to pick up the ones that are particular for design. So I think really for me, before I go into that, it's just that dementia-ready design, it cuts across all the different groups, and that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and we need to work together. If I can move us on. So which recommendations do we need to consider out of those 44 for design? for all of us, there was the first recommendations were for all of us, and really saying it's endemic upon all of us to consider when's the best time to move, and are we living in a house that's right for us, so the right environment and the right design for us, and thinking about making small changes as we need to. The second set of recommendations were for the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS. And really in that, it was strengthening the care and support specialised housing fund prospectus and saying, okay, in that, take on the recommendations of this report. The next set, which is, I noticed there was somebody here from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So the next set were three that were relevant to you, which was around supporting increased provision of extra care housing and assisted living that's dementia ready. So making sure it's dementia ready and doing that through the top sliced grant aid. Also looking at local authorities, local planning authorities responding to demographic changes and the need for more houses that are homes that are designed for older people, including those with dementia. So there's a recommendation there, and implementing those through local plans. And then the last one that I picked up through there was around the building regulations and making sure that we're looking at also using lifetime homes accessibility standards that are encompassed in the part. I always want to say M42, and I know it's not the M42, so you can see I'm not in that sphere of work. The next set of recommendations were for local authorities. So that included, depending on where you are, could be adult social care, housing, services or planning. And the key ones here were that, again, plans should set out the housing demand for people living with dementia in their locality, but also to give cognizance to BAME communities and LGBT communities and how those will be met. And the inquiry heard some really strong messages from people from those communities about supporting their members with dementia. Also for local authorities about specifying in local plans about the accessibility requirements and setting out specific criteria to incorporate dementia-ready housing. And then lastly, that if as an authority you are developing extra care housing or retirement housing, to apply the HAPPI design principles and the specific guidance on dementia design that's in this report, and also to sign up to the Dementia-Friendly Housing Charter. So I hope if you've had a look at the report, you've seen some of those design standards that I think colleagues later in this presentation will talk about. Moving on to the largest target audience, I think that's here today, the housing providers, those of you that are in the room as housing providers. Again, some of the recommendations there were around considering the design and the adaptability of homes for people with dementia. And that would be from both the aspect of hard design and from soft design. And again, I'm not going to go into that because I know that Paul, John or Damien will cover that later. Also, a recommendation around promoting dementia readiness and producing relevant information, both for prospective residents and their family, and signposting about where people can get advice when they come to ask. And using, the last one was about a recommendation to use a learning and information network, which I'm speaking to the converted here because you're all already as part of this presentation, this happy hour. So just to finish on the other group, which was a catch-all, and it wasn't trying to marginalise people, it's just that there wasn't a sufficiently big group to target it into, but it was all those people who are absolutely crucial for getting housing with dementia readiness, such as the developers, the surveyors and all the others. And for those, there were two. One was incorporating the design and technology features that are set out in the new principles into the new developments and adopting the requirements. And the other was around trying to increase knowledge and trying to increase dementia awareness and training to create dementia-friendly homes. And there's lots out there now. It's just about trying to share best practice as well. So lastly, the question is, are we ready? Dementia housing for people with dementia, and we're getting closer. But when you look at over 44 recommendations, for me, I just think, oh, where are we going to start? And you could shy away from it. what I think is, let's replace that with, this is where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to having people who are living with dementia having some level of independence, being in a friendly environment, with the right sort of familiarity and support, so that they can live lives as well as they can. And that needs us all to work together. It also means that we need to ensure that the voice of older people are right in the middle of that, from the point of the initial concept of designing a scheme through to developing it, building it, and then the ongoing management of it. They need to be right in the middle of that for the design and to be right for people who are living with dementia. And that's all I have to say. So I'm going to close down my screen now. I'm sure if you've got questions, we can have them later in the question and answer session, but I think there's time for other people to speak as part of the presentations.
Katie, thank you very much for giving a really clear and informative overview of the APPG report. As you know, as you said, there were over 20 issues and 40 recommendations, and to summarise those so succinctly is very skillful. Your final slide also showed where you can access the report, as well as the Dementia Hub that we host on the Housing Link website. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of the networking, because I know some of the points that you raised are things that both the Housing Dementia Research Consortia and the Dementia and Housing Working Group, who I think are represented here today, I'm sure there'll be issues about how we can work collaboratively to take those forward. But we also, during the process, both received written correspondence and submissions, as well as heard in evidence in person, albeit virtually, and also had one of our presenters this afternoon on the advisory group as well. So I'm really delighted that John, Paul and Damien are with us this afternoon, and the three amigos worked closely with me to develop and extend some of the happy design principles, those 10 principles, and I'm really delighted we can sort of go into and look at those a little bit more over the next 3 presentations. So John, can I sort of pass over to you first, and please do share your screen.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and thanks to Jerome and to Katie as well for joining you today. I'll just start to share the screen now in our presentation. So hopefully you can all see that.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. And I'll kick off now. Okay, so thanks again to everybody. I'm looking at a sort of broad aspect of design here in terms of design matters and design awareness. We've been working closely with the group, both on the housing and design working group, and looking forward to actually taking that through various proposals. We've actually, as a practice, been members of the Dementia Housing Working Group for a couple of years now, looking to Katie. We're actually delighted to have been awarded the world first gold for a dementia-friendly public building at Great Sankey Neighbourhood Hub in Warrington. And we're also delighted that that project has been used as the dementia-friendly case study for the new Sport England 10-year vision, Uniting the Movement. It's important to us as a practice that we see dementia from where we've come from a public building environment, actually see how as we can actually develop dementia-friendly housing socially and across communities. As Jeremy's mentioned, we gave a written contribution to the APPG Inquiry report, and we are also assisting in reframing those 10 original happy design principles to make them more dementia-friendly. As Katie alluded to, there are a whole range of design guides and audit tools that are available. She mentioned the Alzheimer Society guide, which we've contributed to as well. There's great design audit tools available from the University of Stirling, and there are a whole range of other design guides internationally. And these are being continuously updated and improved, and that might be one of the challenges for us, I think, in actually coming to a set of principles in looking at the dynamic nature of how we're addressing dementia-friendly design, particularly as we move through the COVID experience and we see what impact that has on all of us as well. What I've just picked up here is some work we were doing with the Housing and Dementia Working Group. We're asked to present at the UK Dementia Congress a couple of months ago, and that featured very much around the idea of integrated design, and how we get greater integration of input from multidisciplinary teams. That includes clinicians, academics, professionals, registered providers, local authorities, health professionals, to come up with what's essentially flexible and supportive housing solutions. There are specific requirements that we would recommend in terms of dementia-friendly design, but actually keeping buildings flexible and making these advances in terms of design available to all is also very important. So developing those degrees of consistency and transparency in how we design are going to be important, and also equally how those are measured, and the University of Stirling obviously do that very well in terms of their design tool. The slide I'm putting up now is showing you actually the integrated work that we've been doing as the Dementia Housing Working Group, and it's a slide that actually Katie's kindly lent me around the idea of how we have this integrated design approach to create the new normal. And at the heart of that, obviously, is individuals with dementia living well. And we then need to consider policy and practice, and how policy and practice is impacting on that, the opportunity for residents to support each other, and crucially feel part of the community, that the design solutions are personally centred in terms of support and care, and that the design and technology to support those individuals is actually well developed. And whilst it can be a part of the overall solution, I think the sense of it being part of an integrated solution is really what we're trying to communicate. A document from the guidance that I really want to pick up on, and again, thanks to Katie for introducing me to this, was actually the World Alzheimer Report 2020, which I think complements a lot of the work that's been done with the APPG Inquiry, but picks out a couple of very interesting points which we're looking to embed into the way we take the information forward. So Design for Dementia is 30 years behind the physical disabilities movement, and this must change. And that's quite a shocking fact, if you like, that we're that far behind where we were many years ago in recognising how important access for people with physical disabilities was into the built environment. And we were very lucky as a practice. We were involved with the Manchester City Council Design for Access 2 document going back probably 20 years now. And we knew from the work that we were doing there that as we actually improved facilities for people with disabilities in terms of movement, that immediately created better environments for all of us. And the feedback we got from the first few projects we did was that the space and the allocation of space, the way we thought about space, actually brought an atmosphere of calm into the buildings. And we really feel that the work we've been doing now in terms of dementia design is contributing in the same way, taking forward from the physical spaces to consider the emotional response and the actual physical response to spaces has given us a better way of designing, and one which actually again brings about that idea that people say they enjoy being in the spaces. This is picked up in the World Alzheimer's Report in a series of videos where they touch upon the design for comprehensibility, manageability and meaningfulness. And I think these are really important words to give designers an indication of where we need to be going with the designs and what the purpose of those design improvements are. And there's a great phrase here, salutogenic design, which is well-being, and this notion that we're looking at designing spaces for health promotion compared to disease prevention. And I think when you look at that, certainly as a designer, and take that forward in terms of the concept of well-being for an active life, for a contemplative life, and for a restorative life, those elements which actually make up how we design and how we design well for people lean towards that idea of actually designing well for everybody. And crucially, that what we do as architects and designers is actually create the platform or the stage for the interaction of people and their environments. And again, I would encourage you to read the report alongside the APPG report, because it deals with those issues that we in the group are looking at in terms of an integrated multidisciplinary solutions based around the person with dementia. There are a lot of guys, as I've mentioned, in terms of looking for good dementia-friendly design principles, And what I've done in this slide is to pick out a typical guidance 1, pick out a typical guidance 2, and what you will see is there are a sort of range of themes that are regularly connected and identified as people who are looking to design dementia-friendly spaces should consider them. But I've also put in a third column here around the idea of the COVID impact and its impact on people up to the present moment in time. So just to quickly run through some of those points, we look at things like colour pattern and contrast, but we are being made very aware of the long COVID impacts of quite a large percentage of people, and what that means in terms of how we develop environmental comforts, and perhaps being aware of those issues, seeing how they're going to affect the way that we move forward in terms of creating dementia-friendly spaces. Materials and surfaces are very interesting in terms of this notion of infection surviving on different types of materials for quite long periods of time, and how we can actually improve the contactless environment. Lighting, we found that people are spending more time indoors, and therefore the quality of lighting becomes very, very important, both in terms of natural light and artificial light. Orientation and wayfinding, what's happening in typical days. We've all been disrupted by the impact of COVID, and there are new things and tasks for us to live with, such as use of masks, what we actually do in terms of staying safe. New sounds around, there's more people in more environments, neighbours are staying at home. There's a trend towards working remotely, so we need to consider how that will actually impact on us through the typical day. And signage, there are new instructions and symbols which we need to be aware of, and how do we make people aware of those as well. A strong emphasis is around the idea of the outdoor environment as well as the indoor environment, and how we can actually, all of us now appreciate to a much greater extent the value of outdoors, and how we actually get greater value in the quality and range. And again, Katie picked up in the report the connection with planners, with the idea of actually placemaking, and how placemaking can quite readily introduce the notion of dementia friendliness. And again, it's a benefit to all of us. And meaningful engagement. I think this is a really key one in terms of what the pandemic has taught us in terms of staying connected via both in-person and virtual connections, and the use of technology, and how that can actually give us better connectivity, both physical, mental and spiritually, in terms of our well-being. Eating and drinking, those patterns will have changed for good now, probably in terms of how people shop, in terms of food deliveries, storage, etc., and then keeping safe access for friends, family and carers. So I'd just like to finish now with this final slide, which is sort of capturing some of those things that we need to consider, and which I think the APPG report is doing very effectively in actually bringing about that awareness of how we design for dementia-friendly design, and picking up on those recommendations. We do think that the COVID experience can be a catalyst for change in terms of ageing and dementia-friendly design. We think people will have a much greater resonance in terms of their empathy towards people with dementia, because we've all experienced a much greater sense of being within the environments in which we live on a much more prolonged basis, and what that has meant in terms of recognising how the increased isolation and loneliness can affect us, and how that important opportunity to design spaces for social engagement and participation. I think there's a greater empathy for that now. We touched upon the improving space standards, the M42, but also the NDSS standards which have been introduced, and how these are a significant step towards heading for HAPPI, as we describe it, which we actively are encouraging and seeing how they can be adopted quickly now. There are particular things straight away which come out from there in terms of fresh air purging, the importance of fresh air, shelter for private outdoor gatherings, and friendlier and safer neighbourhoods. So this notion of actually taking us beyond the home itself and into our neighbourhoods. Smart tech for digital design and future proofing, and actually introducing the notion of smart environmental design as a part of that, and working closely from the outset with people like mechanical electrical engineers, and the idea of smart tech to bring those all together. Finally, integrating design, building and care, which we touched upon, the remote monitoring and care, and also the enhancement of the existing residential stock, which will be on the next Happy Hour webinar. And finally, picking up on this notion of the new normal, a call for organisations to participate in establishing what the new normal might mean, to include accessible and supportive design for all of us. And I think if that's an opportunity that this report has given, to actually say, how are we going to design better for better connectivity, better engagement for all of us, that will be a huge achievement. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you, and again, thank you for your contribution, both leading up to the final publication of the report, but also this afternoon. And I know we'll come back to several of the points you raised in your presentation, notwithstanding the fact that the Housing Lin is currently concluding another inquiry, which is looking at technology and the advances around technology in a parallel piece of work called TAPPI, Technology for an Aging Population. So again, I think there's a real overlap here, and I look forward to exploring that with you and others. So without further ado, as I mentioned, Glancy Nichols also gave evidence. In fact, Pat actually had to come and present virtually, but I'm really delighted that Paul can join us this afternoon. And Paul's worked very closely on a number of the projects. I know another award-winning architect's practice. So over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to hope to be able to share my screen now, especially as previous presenters have had no problems. So hopefully that has come through to everybody now.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. So really, I want to show some photographs of some of our finished buildings and talk really about what we have experienced with the misconception often levied towards us about how dementia design or dementia-ready design will somehow be very obvious and to many could be perceived as being negative. For us, certainly good design and creating beautiful spaces really should not be restrictive. In fact, dementia-ready design should be the underlining standard for everyone and for all spaces. The provision for those caring for or living with dementia should not be anything special, especially when we now consider that it's estimated that 850,000 people are currently living with dementia in the UK, and this is set to rise to 1 in 10 over 65s within the next 10 years. The image on the screen that you're looking at is of our development called Meadow View in Darley Dale, which was actually commissioned at the time by Katie when she was working for Derbyshire County Council. And we designed this building not only to impact positively to its absolutely beautiful setting, but also to allow residents to benefit from the outstanding views available. So dementia-ready design for us really should not be seen as anything clinical or even taken to the extreme of being potentially custodial. With subtle use of unobtrusive secure lines and inspiring environments, it can actually allow residents to enjoy safe, inclusive homes that inherently improve a person's well-being. Our experience across the whole housing sector has really shown to us that dementia-ready does not need to be exclusive to specialist residential facilities. As I said previously, good design is good design. And many of the awards that we have received for our developments are not sector specific, although they have been sector specific buildings, but they've received recognition and awards for just being good design. And this slide is our first development that was a specialist dementia facility. It was commissioned back in 2005 by Birmingham City Council. And this was a real sea change for how Birmingham City Council were addressing the needs and requirements for their older adult provision. The brief that we were given was to provide a quality hotel feel, and through a shared palette of high quality materials, they would be recognisable as Birmingham City Council provision without the use of, or the overuse of signage. Originally, the plan was to build 10 of these very similar buildings, one in each ward across the city. Each one provided 32 long-term residential beds, 16 respite beds, and 16 respite beds and 16 intermediate care beds. The reason for the respite and certainly the intermediate care was working with the local NHS trusts. This was to free up acute hospital beds and allow people to develop on their road to full recovery, to gaining their full independence and hopefully going back to their own homes. We worked closely with the Stirling University on this development, and we adopted many of their findings from their research, which actually sit quite well with the HAPPI recommendations as well. But also with this building, we actually helped Stirling to develop their accreditation system, which this building was actually the first ever gold standard award winner. Just step forward a few years now, and at our first development with Derbyshire County Council, this was in Swadlincote, Oakland Village. This was created very much with the idea of it being an exemplar development at the time, to bring together not only people living with dementia, but also alongside them to bring independent over 55s together under one roof with shared communal facilities. The facilities have certainly encouraged multi-generational use. A bar, a village hall, an internet cafe, a restaurant, a bistro, well-being suite have all contributed to providing a real community feel to this development, and something that has been fully embraced by the local community across the whole age group, from school children all the way up through the age range. And this again is a real case of this won a regional RIBA award for design, but not as a specific dementia design, just for good housing design. Meadow View at Darley Dale is obviously the slide that I started the presentation with, and we were delighted that one of our photographs was actually selected to be the front cover of the APPG report as well. It does photograph incredibly well, but I think what it shows is that dementia-specific buildings don't have to come with any sort of stigma. They can be welcoming and contemporary in their design. And this project has gone on to win multiple awards across the whole range of architectural awards that are available. One of the ones that we were most pleased to win was actually the 2018 McEwen Award, which recognises architecture for the social good. And the head of the judging panel actually commented that he had driven past the development previously and had thought that it was an upmarket house or flat development, and was very surprised to find that it was not only a care home, but also one that was commissioned and run by the county council, not a private company, as he had first assumed from its evident quality. The layout is designed to reduce anxiety, with social spaces at the ends of corridors and many other dementia-ready details within it. But one of the main aspects is the access for residents to the external landscape gardens. It's intrinsic in the design, with a variety of distinctive and different spaces for external use. The Ada Belfield Centre and Belper Library is actually a regeneration project. The old Thornton's factory has been used to draw together a care home facility and a public library and provide further community amenities. This was commended last year at last year's McEwen Awards, where the judge, Kathy McEwen, actually declared a library with a care home is a fantastic idea, both unusual and stimulating. We totally agree, and the culmination of bringing the various aspects together of the public library, the specialist residential facilities, community cafe, the new public square, and a mixture of new build and historic regeneration in an area of outstanding natural beauty and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has certainly enhanced the opportunities for social integration for the residents, the relatives, and the visitors that come to this development. An interesting fact with this was we were able to get some really early engagement with future residents that allowed us to talk about some of the internal environments and allowed them to influence some of the materials that were chosen and some of the colour choices and the decoration themes. When we're looking at a new build development, we utilise a number of key strategic design considerations to establish how the spaces are used, both internally and externally. But whilst dementia ready, these are just good design strategies. They don't have to be either for ordinary new housing developments or for dementia ready. They're just a good set of principles to work by. Some of the key elements are subdivision of some of these large developments into domestic scale subdivisions with good natural light, views and access to external spaces, with reduced circulation distances to well-located facilities, allowing residents the opportunity for their independence to be maintained, or in several cases, actually regained. Many simple practical solutions have then been included within the layouts, materials and finishes to reduce frustration and anxiety that are often present for those living with dementia. One of the many aspects contained within the APPG report and the updated HAPPI design principles provide for subtle inclusion for better dementia-ready principles. I think the COVID, and this is something that was touched on earlier, the COVID pandemic has actually brought greater awareness of the importance of social interaction, but has also highlighted layout considerations, the use of technology, and the importance of access to external spaces. The well-being benefits of natural light through enhancement of vitamin D levels and to help to regulate circadian rhythms are just two examples of the many benefits to be gained by good access to external space. And then finally, it's more of a question about can the correct age-appropriate dementia-ready design help to address some of the wider housing crisis that the UK is suffering from. Current financial burdens relating to older persons housing and the ever-increasing costs associated with dementia are significant, and these are set to increase exponentially in the next 10 years. Research has identified that better design in housing is an important consideration in the decision-making for over 55s, potentially planning on moving. Whether to stay in place or live well with assistance or relocate to more age-appropriate housing is an important decision to be made. But the under-occupancy and single occupancy can certainly contribute significantly to the under-provision of housing generally. So can providing well-designed homes actually help to alleviate the wider house crisis by freeing up some larger family homes? Thanks very much.
Paul, thanks a lot. And that really followed on neatly from John's presentation and gave some other really insightful examples of how both the design creates a wow factor, but more importantly, its deliverability of the schemes and the ability for both people with dementia, but also family householders to care and support and build that resilience together, which has been ever so important during COVID. Our final contribution this afternoon, before we open it up to Q&A, is from one of the inquiry panel members, Damien Hutton, an architect and director at Balconies Architecture. So Damien, thank you very much for your participation throughout the programme, but also I look forward to hearing your presentation now. So I'm glad you've been able to overcome some of your technical difficulties.
Yes, thanks, Jeremy. Yes, a few technical difficulties, but I'm here now. So if I can just share the screen. So hopefully.
Yeah, we can see it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I'd like to talk about some of the design features in dementia-ready housing. Towards the rear of the report is a table of the HAPPI principles and how that can be adapted to sort of dementia-ready HAPPI principles. So I just want to zip through those 10 principles and just illustrate how they can be applied in sort of real-life situations. This diagram of a typical dementia-ready apartment is in the report as well. So I'm just going to use this to help illustrate the points, as well as a sort of typical dementia-ready apartment block of those yellow squares would be typical apartments. And you can see the sort of more communal spaces there as well. So first point is about sort of generous internal space standards. So it's like having the national described space standards as a minimum, as well as the sort of wheelchair accessible, wheelchair adaptable standards. A step-free wet room, shower room is important, and large enough that wheelchairs, mobility aids can be used. Contrast as well, having the toilet seats that contrast with the white sanitary ware around its end. You can see from the picture there, the shower and the shower rail contrasts with the sort of the dark tiling behind it as well. Having removable walls to create larger open plan spaces so that they're not load bearing, they don't have any electric points on them or radiators, so they can be relatively easily opened up to create larger spaces. Again, the storage areas, could they be removable walls so that you could have a space for a mobility scooter in there? Having the easily accessible kitchen, so it's open rather than behind a door. And what's quite important for people with dementia is sharp contrast in the floor can be perceived as a step. So having the similar floor tones to avoid the perception of a step. If someone thinks it's a step, they might try and step over it on one foot, very unsteady, a risk of falling. So that's quite an important design detail there. Having plenty of natural light is important. The aging eye needs more daylight. So large windows is important, and having those views out. Having a low windowsill, important as well. So if someone's sitting down, they can actually look down onto any activity that's happening outside or to the garden or the like. rather than just looking out at a grey sky. And again, that applies to within the apartments, but also to the communal areas as well. So we get lots of daylight and the ventilation. That has to be balanced with the risk of overheating as well, which we'll come on to in a moment. Having balconies and ease of access to outdoor space, again, with the pandemic, that's become more and more obvious and more important, that people have that access to external space. So people having their own balcony as well is important, and access to the gardens as well. I think also having that sort of feeling of not being isolated as well. Having the balcony means you could sit outside or stand outside and just have a bit of a better connection with the outside world. But you see in quite a lot of extra care schemes, this sort of kitchen window, which you can see in sort of the bottom left picture here. Again, some people like them, some people don't, but it gives that sort of connection of what's going on outside. Even if it's just people passing in the corridor, it can overcome any sort of feelings of isolation or loneliness. And I've seen schemes where people have decorated these with sort of stained glass or put ornaments in them. Again, for people with dementia, it can help them recognise which is their own apartment or which is their friend's apartment as well. For people with dementia, a dead-end corridor can be quite confusing because they might get to the end and not quite know what to do. So just having an event there, which might just be a table and chairs or a little feature on the wall or something like that, can be very important as well. And can corridor spaces actually be opened up so that it becomes more of a space than just a long, narrow corridor? Again, that's going to be balanced with sort of the cost. If you're opening up these spaces, creating more floor area, that can have a cost implication. So somewhere in there's a balance, and as architects, that's our job to find that balance. And future adaptability modifications, which are dementia-ready. Technology is obviously a big issue as well. So is the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi, been installed from the outset to allow for technology to be installed as a plug and play in the future quite easily. Again, it comes down to having those removable walls to create larger open plan spaces, wheelchair adaptable. Again, what's quite an important feature for people with dementia is to actually be able to see the toilet from the bed head. So people with dementia, they may not associate the sensation of needing to go to the toilet with having to go to the toilet, but it can be a memory trigger that if they can see the toilet from where they are in the bed or from elsewhere within their apartment or in communal areas, it can be obvious where the toilet is. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence where in schemes people have painted all the toilet doors the same colour, and the incidence of incontinence have dropped dramatically. Not because people had a medical condition; it's because they couldn't find the toilet itself, but all the toilet doors are painted red or green, or whatever. That can be a sort of memory cue for people. You see that colour door, there's a toilet behind it. Generous circulation spaces, again, leading to an activity or destination, as I say, having some sort of event at the end of the corridor or circulation space. Having that domestic scale as well, because these are people's homes, it's where they live, it's not an institution. So having that domestic human scale is important. Again, for people to have gain access or have ease of access to outdoor spaces or to the communal areas, people with mobility issues who might be a bit frail, just having sort of points of resting points, seating alcoves along the way can be important. Those can turn into sort of little points of interest and themes as well. I know in some schemes they tend not to be used, but again, it depends on how they can be managed, how they can be decorated, and is there access to the outside, or there's a little theme to these little points here. To help people with wayfinding, objects are important to help people with wayfinding. So someone might say, yes, I know my apartment is down the corridor next to the clock, or next to sort of the green wall with the picture of something on it there. Those objects can be very, very important to help with wayfinding and people to find their way around, and again, helping their independence. Community hubs and community facilities open to the public have become very popular over the past few years. And again, it's giving people that choice. So there's the spaces, the community spaces that might be vibrant and activity, so people have the option to get involved with that, but as well as having more quieter spaces, more intimate scale spaces where it might have family meetings, or someone might just want to read a book or whatever, but not actually be in their apartment. So again, having that open space, having active, there might be movable walls in there. So again, you've got that flexible use of space. But again, very important is you actually have quite a secure boundary between what's the public spaces and the more private residence spaces, which may be as simple as just having a sort of coded access on a secure door. Having that easy access to green space, the natural landscape, the outdoor space is just as important as indoor space for people with dementia, for vitamin D production, fresh air, sunlight. And again, as the pandemic has shown us, it's very important for all of us. And it's not just about having a garden with flowers in, it's about that purposeful activity. So you might have raised planters there. It gives the option for gardening clubs to be established, greenhouses, etc. In this particular scheme, there's a looped path, so there's no dead ends. But we made a mistake because that's quite a sharp contrast between the red tarmac and that white paving. So someone with dementia might think that was a step. So that has been changed since the photograph was taken. This scheme actually has a children's playground as well. So visiting grandchildren don't get bored. They've actually got somewhere safe to play. There's sort of resting places, a greenhouse, another different kind of resting place. The windowsills here are quite low, so people sitting down here can actually look down on the activity that's happening. Or in this scheme here, we actually have a covered gazebo, so it might be a wet but warm summer's day, so people can still sit outside. And yeah, having that ease of access to get to these spaces is very important. Having low carbon design, as I say, having large windows is great, but there is the risk of sort of overheating. So that good ventilation is important. And there are guidelines about sort of the height to width ratios and to achieve good sort of cross ventilation. Having the sort of solar shading or brise soleil or large roof overhangs as well can help with that solar shading. Small point of detail, but very important actually with windows, is that the actual window handle, people can actually open it. It's at a level where they don't have to reach up or have to ask someone for help. The window handle is at a level where someone sitting down or in a wheelchair can open it easily. But extra storage for personal belongings, again, it's about having that built-in storage, which could be taken out to create more space if necessary. Again, small points of detail. People with dementia may not, sequencing can be an issue for people with dementia. So putting on their clothes, they might put them on the wrong sequence. So just having the wardrobe here with the hanging rail facing towards you, people can hang up the clothes in the order they would put them on. So no one puts on their shirt on over the jumper and is embarrassed because they go out and find that they're all incorrectly dressed. So a small detail like that can make a huge difference to people. Mirrors as well can be an issue for some people. The people with dementia, they may still think that they're sort of 20 or 25 years old, and they might think that when they see the reflection in the mirror, they don't recognise themselves. They think it's someone looking in on them and can get distressed. Doesn't affect everyone that way because dementia affects everyone differently. But having mirrors that can be taken off if that is an issue is again quite an important small point of detail. Having glass-fronted kitchen cupboards there so people can remember where they've got the cups and saucers and plates, and they don't get frustrated opening cupboard doors and drawers all the time because they can't remember where things are. And then finally, just the actual location of a scheme, being accessible, close to accessible public transport, neighbourhood amenities. Sometimes that's beyond control. We can't always control the sites we have, but scheme that's nearing completion at the moment in South Manchester, Burnage Lane. It's got a great location next to a church and the church hall, next to a bus stop, opposite a convenience store and the local shops and the pub. So really good location for an extra care scheme and becoming part of the allows the scheme to become part of the community, not this institution where people people feel isolated, they still feel part of their local community. So that's just a very quick illustration of some of the potential design features that could be used in dementia-ready housing. So thank you very much.
Damien, and thank you. And I know that there's been a lot of people in the chat box sort of saying, "Yeah, we have these slides, there's such rich content." All of you, that's been absolutely fantastic. And just to reiterate, I think Jerome has posted that we will be sharing these both on the events page, but also anybody who's signed up for these events will get a notification that they are now live. I was also mindful that when all of you were speaking, that poor Monica, who isn't a technologist, is having to think about how she has to interpret this in BSL speak, and I hope that has been okay. It looks impressive. Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes or so, and we'll draw this to a close, but we've got a series of questions that have been posted. In fact, since I last looked, another 2 or 3 have come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of run through those rather than ask any questions that I had prepared, because the whole point is listening to our network members and the comments that they make. And I'll start from the top, really. So Sue joins us, and she talks about, can good design assist people with dementia to live in extra care alongside other people, or is it best to develop separate wings? So I see Katie would like to answer this. So Katie, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jeremy. I saw, Sue, that you posted that really early. And for me, there's a number of issues in there, and there's no absolute right or wrong answer. I think there are some very practical questions that if you have a separate wing, then at what stage do you decide somebody moves into the separate wing? If somebody moves into the main extra care scheme and then develops dementia, should they move into the separate wing, and all the issues that go with that? So there are various pros and cons for having separate or integrated extra care schemes. For me, the most important thing is, though, that with good dementia friendly design for everybody, then the important thing is the timing of when somebody moves, and for somebody to move at a time when they can still find their way around a new environment, develop new routines and develop new friendships. Because if they're in an integrated scheme or a separate scheme, if they can do that, then it's going to be much, much easier for them. And good design for everybody will really help that. So there's no right or wrong answer. I know that a lot of the housing providers and some of you in the audience now probably are moving away from separate schemes into integrated schemes. So that's sort of giving us some anecdotal evidence. And I know Julie, who's also on the call today, has done some work from the University of Worcester on the different types of schemes. So it might be worth following up after this event, but they're just things to consider. Thanks.
Any comments from anybody else on this? Because I think it is an issue that often does come up both for those people who are designing, planning and commissioning as well. So John, Paul or Damien?
Yeah, if I could jump in. Anecdotally, again, I think Katie's right about the timing. When we've gone around to some of our schemes afterwards, after completion, we've heard stories of how someone with relatively low-level dementia moves in, and as the dementia gets worse, their neighbours sort of help them because they've had time to develop that relationship. But if someone with more severe dementia moves in, it can cause a bit of sort of friction because that timing and those relationships haven't had that time to develop. So it does seem that in an integrated scheme, having people with relatively low-level dementia moving in seems to be more, seems to work better.
John or Paul?
I think for me, we've actually done both. We've done integrated schemes and separate wings. They both have different pros and cons to them. I think for me, the whole ethos of what I was saying earlier was that there shouldn't be this sort of segregation, and if we get the design principles right, there's no reason why it can't be all integrated. So that's, I think, is what we would be striving to do.
Yeah, and I see in the chat box somebody's put that's very much they would favour that approach as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jeremy, if I may.
Yeah, please.
So certainly with as I mentioned, with the work we've been doing in terms of dementia-friendly design in the public realm, really to echo what Paul's saying is that we sort of take a scheme forward with the dementia-friendly principles applied. If you bring them in at the right time, they don't need to necessarily mean extra capital cost investment. It's just good design, which eventually is good design for all. So rather than thinking there is a dementia wing, there is an actual over 55s wing, actually make the whole thing dementia friendly from the outset as much as we can.
Yes, have that inclusive approach. The next question is probably a little bit more technology focused, and I think all of you in your presentations touched on different smarter approaches. Perhaps this is aimed more at the architects, Katie, than you, but please do come in if there is anything. It's very much around sort of issues around door entry system, key fobs, and looking at sort of issues which are quite challenging. Any examples and models that you've come across which you think work well? Paul, do you want to kick off on this one?
Yeah, it's always a real issue to be dealt with, especially when you are looking at that integrated type of scheme. Door entry systems from pavement into a development for out of hours use can obviously be very confusing. The use of swipe cards for residents can be an issue. There's actually technical difficulties then with legislation. So if you're looking to try and get secure by design accreditation, well, as far as I'm aware, there are no products on the market currently that pass the criteria of secure by design, but are also swipe cards. It has to be old-fashioned key. And the problem then that you have is loss of those keys and not being able to just simply replicate on a swipe card and change the codes and deliver a new one. So I think that is a real problem that the industry is still struggling with.
Any comments from John? Or?
Yeah, I think one of the things. Sorry, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is part of the what we're sort of looking for in our last slide was to say how do we actually get this technology and the guys who are creating a lot of the technology to look towards things such as personalization. So a lot more if you like intelligence in a fob to actually say I'm a person who can actually gain access to such and such a place in terms of the safety and security of that person. So doors which will actually perhaps not be there or there in other circumstances. It's a lot of the advancement I think we can make through technology to actually make spaces and journeys and routes through spaces barrier free or protected. And there's a lot of work and research that I think that can go into that to make buildings more intelligent, if you like, for the user.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to another question, which is very much from an anonymous attendee, and that maybe you want to keep your name obviously withheld, but it's very much more about sort of interior design, furniture and fittings. It's about basin taps. And any thoughts about, crosshead taps, are they more suitable? But then there's a question about infection control, and we've been talking about COVID, how do you decide what's the best option? Does anyone want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, I will, Jeremy. It's about familiarity. I think most people who are of an age now who might be living in extra care or care schemes are probably more familiar with a hot and cold tap that has a H&C or blue and red on it. But again, it might be a generational thing. I think people of our generation or younger, if you like, probably getting more familiar with mixer taps. And even the new Dyson tap, which you put your hand under it, the water comes out, you move your hand to the side, and it's the dryer. Doesn't look like a tap, totally unfamiliar. But again, it's about what's familiar to people, and it's a generational thing and a cultural thing as well of what people are used to. So I would say at the present, people in extra care and care schemes are more familiar with two taps and crosshead taps, but that's something that over the years will probably change.
I'm Conscious we are sort of nearing and close, but I do want to just touch on the final three questions. Well, Damien, there's one for you, and perhaps I can ask Paul and John to respond to one of the others each as well. So, Damien, while you were speaking, can you just come back on this thing about the children's play area? There's a question about, can you advise which of the schemes will have a children's play area? I think that is.
Right. Well, that scheme I illustrated was the Belong Village in Plattbridge, Wigan. That is schemes that we've done. I think that's probably probably the best one we've done. So that's certainly one. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any others that have a little children's play area in there, but I'm sure there are that other people have developed and. That we've done as well. It's just off the top of my head, I can't place any at the moment. But yeah, that's the Belong Village in Wigan.
Oh, thanks. I think one of the things that comes out of that is, we need to think intergenerationally as well. So that's a really good point. And if people are interested, we do have a dedicated page on our website which looks at different models of intergenerational housing with other examples. Can I come to you, John, again? I don't know whether you can sort of come back to this question about fire safety and issues about the tension between fire safety and good design for dementia. Any advice you can give for designing for both?
Yeah, I think as architects, we recognise the huge significance of the Hackett reports and what that's actually producing in terms of the change in thinking around fire safety and design, and then how that affects people with dementia. We're recommending to all of our clients that as we move forward, we bring the skills of a fire engineer, an engineering consultant on very early, and we need to consider how we're actually making the use of fire safety spaces, but also actually having things such as doors en détente, so we're not actually surrounding people with doors everywhere they turn. Again, it sort of ties in a little bit with the idea of the personalization of tech. If we can actually get the technology to give us more support so we can create those areas where we do have fire safety, but at the same time, not make them feel very institutional. And I think there's a big exercise there, but also just to flag that we all need to be very, very aware of what recommendations are coming through in terms of fire safety. It's going to have a big impact on the sector.
Yeah, and colleagues may not be aware, but there is a major review going on about fire safety, obviously post-Grenfell, but there's also a particular task and finish group that's looking at fire safety issues in relation to extra care housing and retirement living as well. So that's being led by MHCLG, and another practice, architects practice, I think it's PRP Architects, and Andrew is leading on that piece of work, and we'll happily share the findings from that in due course. The final question, if I can just run over a minute or two, is from Jack, who I believe works within the Greater Manchester Councils, and very much perhaps coming back to thinking more broadly beyond the affordable housing sectors. How can you encourage private developers and planners to prioritise this as well, especially where they may have public land assets? So any thoughts? And Paul, could I ask you to kick off with that?
Yeah, I think it's just getting this message home about being dementia ready doesn't necessarily have to present any huge barriers or differences, and certainly doesn't necessarily have to create additional capital cost. If we get the design right, the design is right for everyone.
Thank you. And any final concluding comments from Damien, John, or Katie?
I would agree with Paul on that point about good dementia-ready design doesn't need to make any distinction between public or private or any sort of age difference. Good dementia design is good for all.
Yeah, I think perhaps finally, just to comment and come back to one of Paul's slides, that when you consider the actual numbers of people that we're talking about now who are aging, the way that we need facilities that are more age-friendly, hopefully that will incentivize people to see that it actually increases and improves the offer that can be made.
Thanks for that, and can I also thank everybody who's posted questions and comments, and I hope you've found this happy hour a highly informative session. We're very much looking forward to the follow-up one in May to coincide with Dementia Awareness Week. We will circulate the recording, the slides, and very much look forward to linking in with you again in the future. Can I also thank Monica, colleagues at Action for Deafness. You have been signing for nearly an hour and 20 minutes. I know that's probably longer than everybody, so a big round of applause to you, and thanks very much for your involvement. Finally, can I just encourage you to go back to the report and look at some of the recommendations around housing and design. There are very high level ones, technical ones, but also above all how we can champion by becoming dementia friends. And I know the Housing Lin, working closely with the HDRC and the Dementia Housing Working Group, will be looking how we can collaboratively network together and ensure that the leadership that's required in the sector to drive this forward will be taken forward. So watch this space for how we do that. So on behalf of the Housing Lin, I wish you a very warm afternoon, and I'm afraid I can't shower you with a cold drink, but do go and refresh your bits that other things can't refresh. Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.